everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jessie and today I am doing my May wrap up. In the month of May, I read a total of 16 books and I had 1 DNF. So in terms of the star ratings, I read a total of 4 5-star books, 6 4-star books, 4 3.5-star books, 1 3-star book, and 1 2-star book. In terms of the genre breakdowns, I read a total of 9 fantasy books, 2 sci-fi, 2 dystopian, 1 romance, 1 thriller, and 1 manga. For the age range breakdowns, I read a total of 1 middle grade, 3 young adult, and 12 adult books. So those are the stats. Now let's get into all of the books individually that I read. If you don't know how I do my wrap-ups, I try to leave some videos periodically throughout the month doing like little mini wrap-ups that go deeper into my thoughts on like the latest 4 or 5 books that I've read. I only did one of those videos this month, so I am going to have to go into a lot more depth with quite a few books in this wrap-up, but I will link all of those previous wrap-ups and review videos down below if you want to see deeper thoughts for any of the ones that I've already talked about. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The first book I read was The Tiger's Daughter by K. Arsenault Rivera. This I gave 4 stars. I've already talked about it in a previous wrap-up. I really found myself enjoying this book a lot more than I thought I would. I didn't really know anything much going into it. I knew that it was an Asian-inspired fantasy, but I didn't realize that most of this book is told in second person. So if that is something you don't love in a book, you may not be interested in reading this, but I found the writing super beautiful. It's Asian-inspired fantasy about these 2 warrior women who grow up together and have this really beautiful love story, so I highly recommend this one. The next book I read was Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. I have a full review of this down below. I'm not going to go into too much detail. All I'm going to say, high fantasy, adult fantasy, so much fun, so much humor, so much action, awesome magic system. Highly recommend this one. The next book I read was Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. I also have a full review of this one, so not going to go into too much detail. This is an assassin nun epic high fantasy, definitely adult. I loved some of the characters were great. The premise behind it, so much fun. Magic system, a little confusing. World building, I'm intrigued. There's lots of potential here. I'm excited to continue on with the series, and I gave this 4 stars. The next book I read was Blood of Elves by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the first official book in the Witcher series. I read the 2 previous short story collections. This was already mentioned in a previous video, so all I'm going to say is this felt very much like a setup book. I still love the characters. I still really enjoy all of the worlds and creatures that we're introduced to, but this very much felt like it was setting up the rest of the series, so I gave it 3.5 stars. It's my least favorite so far, but I'm really excited to continue on. The next book I read was Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. Again, already mentioned in a previous video. This is the follow-up companion novel to Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey, which was one of my favorite romances of last year. One of my favorite books of last year. I love Fix Her Up. Love Her or Lose Her follows a kind of second chance romance. Married couple needs counseling. Not quite as fun. The characters were a little bit more blah, forgettable, but it still had a lot of that cute wit and chemistry in this book, so I liked it, but it wasn't as good as Fix Her Up by any means, so I gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I read was The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This is my 3rd Jane Harper novel. She writes these very cozy mystery novels that are very atmospheric, make you very thirsty because they're in just like the middle of nowhere, Australia. I love the atmosphere in these novels. They are slower paced, so if you like your thrillers with big twists and turns and lots of action, these aren't going to be for you, but I really like Jane Harper's writing. I really like her character work. I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's not my favorite Jane Harper, but still very good. The next book I read was Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This is an adult horror novel about killer mermaids. Super creepy, very fun. A lot of science talk in this book, which was very unexpected, but really interesting. I really liked that part of it, how scientific it got with these mermaid creatures. Hi! So I really recommend this one for horror fans. I was a little bit disappointed with the ending, and I wish there was a bit more of the scares, but I thought it was a lot of fun. And then the last book that I have previous videos talking about that I'm going to go over before we get into books that I haven't talked about in previous videos, and that is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, the Hunger Games prequel that follows President Snow's story during the 10th Hunger Games. I have a full review of this. I didn't like it, but I've heard a lot of people who do, so it's getting a lot of mixed reviews. So you're either gonna love this or you're gonna really not like it. I fell into the camp of really not liking it. I just found it really boring, and there's definitely subtleties to President Snow's behavior that lead you to believe he could become the big bad villain that he becomes in the Hunger Games trilogy, but they were too subtle. I wanted more villainous Snow, and I didn't get that. So I have a full review if you want to see more thoughts, both spoiler-free and spoiler thoughts. So I gave this 2 stars. Sorry. Okay, so now talking about books that I haven't talked about before. The first being Sun by Lois Lowry. This is the final book in the Giver Quartet, which is a middle grade dystopian series. I really loved this last book because it finally brought everything together, and you guys finally got to see the endings of all these different characters that you've been following throughout the rest of the books. I really loved this one, and I loved the new introduction of the characters in this book and the story that it told kind of in the first half of the book. Gosh, I just really was extremely satisfied with this ending. It made me happy that I had read the entire quartet instead of leaving off with just The Giver. I personally love this quartet. I would highly recommend it. I think it just has really important themes and discussions, and I gave this 5 stars. Love it. The next book I read was A Memory Called Empire by Arcady Martin. I was so pleasantly surprised with this book. I had heard good things because it had great reviews on Goodreads. It's a debut novel, and it does not read like a debut novel. Wow, this is a space opera. It was my first space opera that I've ever read, and I loved it. I was so pleasantly surprised with how much political intrigue was introduced in this book. And at first, when you first start this book out, you are going to be so confused because everything in this book is completely different than our world. I should probably tell you what the book is about. It's about this woman who becomes a new ambassador to this empire that is on a different planet. She actually lives on a space station, and so she is kind of the ambassador, the bridge between this space station and this empire. So she travels to this empire and lives on this planet and realizes that the previous ambassador, something mysteriously happened to him that resulted in his death, and she believes that it was not an accidental death, so she's trying to figure out who's out to get her and why. It also introduces this really cool sci-fi concept of implanting someone else's consciousness into your own brain, and it's really fascinating. I really loved the sci-fi elements in this book. I loved the political intrigue. It was very political, so this isn't gonna be for everybody, but I ended up really enjoying it. The world building was superb, and again, the first 50 pages I was like, I don't understand what's going on, but if you hang in there, it'll all make sense. You'll start to really understand it and get it, and it's really fast-paced and fun. I loved this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars because it was just so dense that at times I was very confused, and it did take a while to finally pick up, but when it did, I was totally hooked. I can't wait for the second book in this series. I don't know if that's going to be the final book. I don't know how many books are going to be in this series, and I don't think the second book is coming out until next year, so I'm super bummed I have to wait so long. But if you were looking for a really political space opera that has a ton of great world building and really unique sci-fi elements, I highly recommend Memory Called Empire. It also has great characters, which is always a good plus. The next book I read was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I honestly have no idea what to think about this book. I think I need to reread it. I listened to it on audio, and maybe that wasn't the way to go because I just don't know. I have no feelings. I have no feelings toward this book. I didn't dislike it. I didn't love it. I just kind of feel very, very meh about it, and I have no idea what to say. I liked the atmosphere. It has all these things that I love in books, like very dark, gritty atmosphere. It has ghost stories and ghostly elements to it, which I love in books. But for some reason, maybe it was the characters I didn't totally connect with, and I can't put my finger on what it was about this book that I just really didn't connect with, because I love Leigh Bardugo's writing in her other series, and something about it, again, maybe it was because I listened to it on audio and I need to just go back and reread it physically. So I'm gonna give it 3.5 stars because I liked it, but it was very slow paced, and like there was these moments of brilliance in it, but in between those moments of brilliance was so much like filler. It felt like, I don't know what it was. I'm really curious to hear what you guys have to say about Ninth House, because I don't know what I thought. I don't know. I'm like at a loss for words, and that never happens. I usually always can like pinpoint what it was about a book that I didn't like, and for this one I just can't figure it out. What is it? So I do want to give it another chance, because so much that I like about this story, and maybe audio was just the wrong way to go for me. So I don't want to be too harsh on it, because I think it's a me thing, and I think it was how I consumed the story that affected my rating. So that's why I'm giving it the 3.5 stars. It's not bad by any means, but it wasn't great. So yeah, that was such a bad review, my lord. The book I read was Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire, the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series. And you guys, I just don't know if this is the series for me. I can totally see the appeal of these stories. I can totally see why some people are head over heels in love with these stories. They offer so much, but the things that they offer just aren't for me. Like I can't pinpoint, like it's Ninth House. It's hard to pinpoint what exactly about these books I just really don't connect with. I really don't connect with any of the characters. The world building, these books are teeny tiny, so the world building in them, it like starts off good, and then you don't get like a lot of payoff from it because it's just over so soon. So maybe it's like the novella style. I don't feel like I get enough story packed into these to really like connect with, and enough character work to connect with. So just these don't work for me, and I don't know if I should continue on. I've heard people say that like the 4th book in this series is some of their favorites, so I can't tell. I probably will continue on just because they're so teeny. It's so easy to get through them. And hearing that the 4th book is like some people think it's the best, that makes me interested in continuing on, because I liked the 2nd one just fine, but I didn't really connect with anything about this book, but I can totally see the appeal. So I gave it 3 stars because there were some things that I appreciated a lot in this book, but some at the end of the day, I don't think these are for me. The next book I read was The Black Prism by Brent Weeks. I gave this 5 stars. I loved this book. It was like Foundryside, where I just finished it and was like, oh my god, I love this. I have to scream it from the rooftops. I love it, I love it, I love it. This is an epic adult high fantasy that is set in this world where the magic system is based off of colors. Some people have the ability to what's called draft certain colors, and so they can like absorb certain colors that are around them to create like power inside themselves, and utilize and like create these different shapes with these colors that they can absorb. And I don't know, it's really cool. It's such a cool magic system, and I loved the characters in this book. I am going to say right here, I do not think that this book is going to be for everybody, because I do think that you either like love or hate the characters in it. They worked so well for me. Like Kip, I have heard people just rip on Kip he gets so much hate, and I loved Kip. He is this teenage boy who is super insecure with himself, has no self-esteem, no self-confidence, and he's kind of the protagonist that we follow who kind of jumpstarts a lot of the story. So you follow his perspective a lot in this book, and he's not the only perspective you follow, but he's like one of the main ones. And a lot of people are going to be rubbed the wrong way by some of the commentary that he has on the people around him, the characters that he interacts with, and just his thoughts in general are very much like a teenage boy's thoughts would be. I can't really speak to the accuracy of them because I am a girl, but I loved Kip because I can see where he has so much room to grow, and I can see him becoming this awesome character. And I love that we're starting out with him just in this really bad place, in this really bad state of mind where he has zero confidence and he's really clumsy. He like doesn't know what he's doing. He's kind of just like stumbling through life right now. I could just tell like he is going to be such a great character by the end of this series. I can just see it now unfold before my eyes, and I can't wait to follow his journey and see him gain that confidence and see him become more comfortable in his own skin. I love that. And the other characters in this book I absolutely love. I could do a whole review on this book, but I'm trying to keep it kind of short and sweet here. The characters are great. There are a ton of plot twists in this book throughout the story that answer questions but then bring up other questions, and you're just left wanting more. I loved this book. I love the pacing of it. I really didn't think it ever kind of slowed down too much. It really kept the pace up. I was excited to pick it up again whenever I put it down. Everything about this book worked for me, but it's not going to be for everybody. I think some of the humor in it is going to rub people the wrong way. So I definitely wouldn't like blanket recommend this to everybody. Some of the humor in it is a little bit crass, I would say, but I really enjoyed it. I found it a ton of fun, and I cannot wait to continue on with this series. The next book I read was my one DNF, and that was Red Sparrow by Jason Matthews. This is the book that the Jennifer Lawrence like Russian spy movie was based on, and while I really enjoyed the beginning of this book because we are following these two characters, one being an American in the CIA and one being a woman in the KGB, it quickly kind of becomes a lot more complex and introduces a lot more character perspectives in it that becomes very bogged down in intelligence talk. So if you're not a seasoned reader in espionage thrillers, then you might be like me and be super confused kind of halfway through this book when it starts to really ramp up that intelligence talk and introduce all of these other big players. I'm not going to say that this is a bad book by any means. I just don't think that it was for me because I don't read espionage thrillers a lot. I was just so confused after a while and was like, this is not for me. I'm still interested in watching the movie though, because I've heard that's good. So overall, like, if you read espionage thrillers and this sounds interesting to you about a CIA American having kind of this forbidden romance with a Russian spy, then I highly recommend, but it just didn't work for me. The next book I read was Sailor Moon Volume 2. This was the one manga I read. I loved Sailor Moon as a kid, and revisiting Sailor Moon now as an adult is just so much fun. These are such cozy reads for me. They just put me in the best mood. I gave this 5 stars. I feel like I can't give any of them less than 5 stars just because they're so nostalgic, and I just love being back with these characters and back in this world. I just love it. So Sailor Moon, if you're a huge Sailor Moon fan, I can't recommend these Eternal editions enough, especially because they have like some of these colored pages that are stunning. So I love these. The next book I read was The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I had actually read this a couple years ago physically and was not a huge fan of it because I need a balance between plot-driven and character-driven stories to really love a story, and this is very character driven. There's hardly any plot in it. The plot starts to kind of form halfway through the book, into the end of this book, but for like the first half of this book there's really no plot. You're just kind of following these characters who are living their lives. And this second time around I wanted to give this another shot because I've heard so many people just love Joe Abercrombie on this community. So I really wanted to give this another shot, and I listened to it on audio, and my goodness, the narrator for this audiobook brought this story to life so vividly. I couldn't believe what a good job he did. Every character he created a totally different voice for. He just told it so well that I loved it. I really connected so much more with the characters this time. I could finally see that plot that I was missing the first time around. So I really ended up loving this story, but I do still only recommend this book to readers who appreciate and love character-driven stories. Because if you are not a character-driven reader, then you still, I don't think, would appreciate this, because it's just so heavily focused on like our three main characters who for a lot of the time are kind of just going through life. But I was so excited to continue on with this series now. I actually bought Before They Are Hanged like immediately upon finishing this because I just really enjoyed it, and I do recommend the audiobook route if you want to give this a shot. The audiobook is so good. I ended up giving this 4 stars. And the last book I read was Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. You know what this reminded me a lot of was The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. That type of writing that's very atmospheric and almost feels like a fairy tale is very much present in this book. The writing in this book is stunning. It follows this woman who lives in this little village, and every 10 years in this village, they have to sacrifice like one of their women to this wizard who lives nearby in the village. And this wizard kind of takes the girls for 10 years, and then the girls leave the village after 10 years, and no one knows what happens to them during those 10 years with this wizard. No one knows what happens to them afterwards. They kind of just disappear. They change forever. So everyone's very nervous about this wizard, and it's about this woman who doesn't expect herself to get chosen by this wizard, but ends up getting chosen, and kind of the story starts from there. I don't want to say too much. I did really enjoy parts of this book. Some of it was really interesting, and I liked the first half of it a lot. I will say it's slower paced to an extent. What was it about this book that just like didn't totally, something about like it didn't totally connect with me. Like I think The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, I gave that book 4 stars because the writing, while it was beautiful, it's not my style of writing that I usually love, but what really saved that series for me and ended up making it like one of my favorite series was the characters. And so in this book, I mean, it's a standalone, and since I didn't feel like I really connected to the characters, and I don't have any other books now to read to connect to the characters, I just didn't love it. I do still recommend it though. If you enjoyed The Bear and the Nightingale, I think you would really like Uprooted because the writing style reminded me so much of it. It's very beautiful, very atmospheric. A lot of this book I can see and appreciate and really love, but most of it was just a little bit boring for me. I wasn't excited to keep going. So that's why I gave it 3.5 stars, but it's not a bad book by any means. 3.5 stars is not a bad rating, so I would still recommend this book overall. I do want to go back and reread it eventually because maybe I just wasn't in the right state of mind while reading it. So I do want to give it a fair shot and maybe read it again in the future, but for right now, it's a 3.5 star. Oh my god, this is such a long video. Those were all of the books that I read in the month of May. I really need to start doing more mini wrap-ups so that these videos aren't that long. My goodness. So hopefully you enjoyed this wrap-up. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And until next time, bye.